So this infographic is related to the Beirut explosion of 2020, I believe it was. It's the sixth largest non-nuclear explosion in the world's history. So you can see it right there at
Yeah,
1.3 kilotons.
yeah, it's huge.
There's a big bang here, which makes me feel shocked, stunned, and also a sense of awe. Just through trial and error, we've developed our own kind of language about how you structure cues. So, what's an example of a bad cue? A bad cue would be something like, "What should I do about John?" Or "How can I get rich?"
Hmm.
And so instead of, "How can I get rich?" you would want to write a more specific cue, which could be something like, "My optimum wealth trajectory." Like we say, just through trial and error, we've tested all these words and we've seen that this kind of language works.
People have their own views they keep, some pass it on, some don't.
Exactly. And so it's kind of like you don't want to call us alchemists or whatever, but some of us have our own secret words that we found work very well, and they're kind of passed on secretly, and so there's a little bit of an apprentice approach kind of going on here.
Yeah.
So um, also the terms short term and near term and long term have certain definitions, and there's some debate about how long those
Mm.
refer to. And so if you wanted to look at, what should I be doing in the next 12 to 18 months, you could create the cue, my optimum short-term trajectory. And the word trajectory has also been tested as well. So that's just a few examples of the first phase about queuing. So once you have that agreed upon, and if you're working with a team, you can debate. Typically, if you're working with a team, you would have one person who's acting as the queuing or the project manager who's in charge of the queue, and then you have the other people on the team that don't know what it is, basically. So, but once everybody's confident that somebody can structure something in terms of language, they'd be in charge of that, and everybody else would be blind. So that would be queuing, basically. So another recognized term is referred to as open search. Open search is basically something which is shown to be happening in the future somewhere in the world within the next 2 to 8 weeks. Um, I'll have an example of that coming up, so we'll get back to that. In terms of the pitfalls of queuing, you can have queues that are very, very wide, and it's not really very useful. For example, in one of the other remote viewing methods, there was a queue. It targeted an entire space shuttle launch mission. And as a training target, that's not very good because a session like the space shuttle mission was a 2 week long thing, and so you could literally get
Mm. Mm.
anything at any point along within 2 weeks, and it just wasn't very useful. Um, so in terms of training target, you want to have a very, very specific, tightly controlled thing within a time.
It gives us the information that we need, that our queue warrants, requires. What we get back, there's no fluff in it. It's up to us to analyze
Yes.
it properly and do something with it and refine our next question.
And so, if somebody's targeting or queuing a target, which is an entire space shuttle session, there were some people who were getting mission control. There were some people that were getting the rocket. And so the answers were all over the place. They're all kind of legitimate, but it's very difficult to do that as a training target. It needs to be much more focused, in my opinion. So.
Mm.
And so there's another pitfall that happens in queuing, and I'm sure you'll have an opinion on this, is arrow cues, cues that are actually literally pointing to something. I don't like those at all. I tend to prefer word cues. Arrow cues, I tend to remote view the tip of the arrow and the actual thing that it's pointing at. So, for example, I was given a cue of looking at Abraham Lincoln, and instead, I was getting this stuff I didn't understand, and I was basically remote viewing the tip of the arrow and Abraham Lincoln's button on his jacket because it was that precise, right? And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on, why I was making that error. But whenever there's an arrow cue, I always get the tip of the arrow and exactly what it's pointing at. Yeah, we were discussing the three phases of remote viewing. The first phase being queuing, the second being the remote viewing session itself, and the third phase being analysis. And so phase two, the remote viewing session itself. But I just wanted to use an example of data that I got. I did what was referred to as an open search, which is a tested queue. So we had the phase one, the queuing correct. So this infographic is related to the Beirut explosion of 2020, I believe it was. It's the sixth largest non-nuclear explosion in the world's history. So you can see it right there at 1.3 kilotons.
Yeah, it's huge.
There's a big bang here, which makes me feel shocked, stunned, and also a sense of awe. This stuff rains down below as it drops. It is not subtle. There's a high cloudy plume above. And something here is settling upon these people. They feel wary, upset, and confused. It is likened to a battle that you cannot win. This situation has arisen from a big, wandering, drifting cloud of pieces high above. This situation has arisen from a loud, dusty ejection from a crater. And so that was all the data associated with the drawings from the actual session work itself. And so moving on to phase three of the remote viewing phases would be analysis. Is like at that point, you're trying to figure out within this data, what is the actual thing? You know, what is the actual thing that this open search is pointing to? And, you know, analysis can take, 5 minutes or it can take weeks. In this case, it's pretty easy to basically say that this is some kind of explosion. And so when we had all this data and we're looking for an explosion, then we've tested the open search queue to know that it's pointing to something 2 to 8 weeks in the future. You just, you kind of watch the news and you see something, and then you get a couple of candidates. In this case, it was really, really obvious from the news that this was the main thing. So you want to avoid data fitting, and sometimes you can think you see the right thing, but then another candidate comes up. And so during that time period, this was really obviously the thing that it was pointing to, as it was a big news item as well. I like to do a lot of future cues, and some of the language on that is proprietary, so I can't share them. But I like to look at future news story, future world events. I try to stay away from financial forecasting because it just doesn't interest me for some reason. I tend to gravitate towards big news stories, societal type stuff, politics, that kind of stuff. I've looked at Canadian politics quite extensively about, what certain political parties should do in terms of their future strategy, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of applications, I think, for politics, political strategy.
You're choosing to target one of the most difficult kinds of targets. It's one thing to remote view something that exists in the here and now, quite another to remote view something that perhaps doesn't exist right now and that will exist later. I mean, there's different points of view on this, how it's tied.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a huge debate about what the future means and as to whether you can remote view it. But it's almost like your remote viewing is an atheoretical thing in that, and I think Ed Dames has actually even said this, that physicists won't agree that remote viewing exists because they can't find a theory that explains it. We just go ahead and try things, and some of the future language cues that we've developed do seem to work and be useful and helpful. So we just kind of keep testing, and you get something that works, and you just move forward. So I agree that there's probably things like timelines, and I think the future may be malleable, certainly. But I get stuff that's helpful for me, so I just keep doing it.
That's awesome. I mean, really, if you can apply that to things in your own life, just without, talking about clients and what they want, but it's such a big deal to be sure about the next step you're taking. At least to be as sure as you can be with a little bit more
Yeah,
information, and
yeah.
yeah, remote viewing is great for that.
No, I think it's the best, one of the best personal improvement tools out there when it's done well.
One of the big things that opened up for me was an understanding of other people and not just people, animals, I mean,
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
I mean, I became a little bit more relaxed. I began to see that the world was just the universe is so huge and vast because there's just a lot of variance going on and we're just a very small part of it. It's uh
Yeah, yeah.
it's akin to being to having a religious experience, I suppose, like
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that was very similar to some of the mystical experiences I had in a sense. What we see in front of us is not really the whole story. It's not even all, not even most of the story. There's much more of us maybe somewhere else doing something else. Yeah. 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 And you feel connected and you feel kind of smaller yet bigger at the same time. It's really,
I listened to a guy talking, and I haven't got the name or anything like that, but he was a professor of in the field of neuroscience anyway, I think, talking about consciousness. I mean, you can find this video on YouTube, and
yeah.
if I say it's about consciousness, what is consciousness? He was talking about his belief. I think it's a theory that he's been drawn to, and that's that consciousness is everything. We're part of it, and
Yeah.
we're almost like an avatar. We are out on our own. We're one bit of it acting. What a mind blowing
Yeah.
thought.
Right.